Well, Homer is an enigma in many ways. Homer is there. Homer is these two texts, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and in antiquity there were many more texts that were thought to be by Homer. Some of them we have, the so-called Homeric hymns, but we these days tend to think of the Iliad and Odyssey as the works of Homer, and they're there right at the beginning of Greek literature. But who was Homer? Perhaps indeed who were Homer? As that's one of the forms that the so-called Homeric question has taken, and it's taken different forms in different times. One traditional Homeric question is: are the Iliad and the Odyssey the work of the same poet? And people will have given different answers to that. Most people, most scholars today would probably think no, but tread rather carefully there. Um, is it the work, is any one poem quite the work of a single author in the same way as we might think of, say, Virgil later, the work of a single author? Well, the best reason for thinking that the answer is going to be yes, or at least more yes than no, is simply that they're so marvellous, that they have such a unified, such a brilliant conception. They do not read like poems written by a committee. But it is likely to be a little bit more complicated than that. It looks as if something happened, we don't know quite what, around 700 perhaps BCE, perhaps a little bit earlier, perhaps a little bit later, perhaps a little bit earlier in the case of the Iliad than the Odyssey, which brought together a lot of material that had been available, had been circulating for quite a long time, and probably was circulating as what we call oral poems. We call them oral poems is a slightly odd phrase because, in a sense, a lot of poetry later in antiquity too is oral in the sense that it's primarily for oral performance. All of Greek drama is oral poetry in one way, but what we mean particularly in the case of Homer is orally composed without the aid of writing. And we can see that there has been quite a long period of oral composition that has come in before the poems take their present shape. One sign of that is one very striking feature that immediately hits anybody reading them, the use of the same sorts of adjectives time and again, so that there's Odysseus is the man of the many wiles, or the much enduring godlike Odysseus, and Achilles is a swift runner, and Agamemnon is lord of men, and so on. And these are they're varied. There are several different epithets for each of the major heroes, but they tend to be very geared to their particular position in the hexameter line. And this is a very, very intricate, very highly developed system that must have grown up over many generations. So it looks as if there have been lots of poems going around that about the Trojan War, about Odysseus, probably about other themes as well, that gradually get brought together at something like that time into a first of all the Iliad, then the Odyssey. What it is that brings them together then? Perhaps it's something to do with writing. Perhaps it's for the first time they can be written down. Perhaps it's something to do rather simply with the genius of one great poet or two great poets that finally bring them together. But it does look as if it's whatever Homer is doing, or Homers were doing, if it's a case of two of them, they are building on some sort of body of oral poetry that pre-existed and would have been not merely composed orally with people without the use of writing, but would have doubtless been performed orally as well. We should think of people in taverns or in the equivalent of coffee shops delivering these to doubtless spellbound audiences, and audiences that came to know the poems very well and would be able to recognise hints of things that came before or hints that came later as well. So writing for audiences that are themselves very, very deeply immersed in a tradition that they knew pretty well.